Racist cop blackmails and threatens to kill a black woman, only to find out she's the FBI director. The evening was quiet, and the small town streets looked almost empty under the fading light. Angela drove calmly, her hands steady on the steering wheel, as she made her way home after a long day. She was dressed simply, blending in like any other professional woman returning from work. Nothing about her appearance gave away who she truly was. To everyone passing by, she looked like an ordinary citizen. But behind her calm eyes lived years of strength, discipline, and a position of power that most people could only imagine. As she slowed near an intersection, flashing blue and red lights suddenly lit up behind her car. The sharp sound of a police siren broke the silence. She sighed gently, pulling her car to the side of the road. She had done nothing wrong, but she knew from experience that encounters like these often had little to do with actual violations. The patrol car stopped close behind, and in her rearview mirror, she saw a tall officer step out. His walk was heavy with arrogance, his face tied with suspicion. This was Officer Daniels, a man who had earned a reputation in town for being harsh, aggressive, and unkind. Many residents, especially people of color, feared him more than they trusted him. Stories about his behavior had spread quietly, but few had dared to challenge him. He carried himself like someone untouchable, someone convinced that his badge gave him power to do whatever he pleased. Tonight, he saw Angela's car as his next opportunity. Daniels approached her window, his flashlight in hand, even though there was still enough light to see clearly. He tapped the glass hard, more forceful than necessary. Angela rolled it down halfway, keeping her face calm and polite. "License and registration," he barked, his tone sharp, not neutral like it should have been. Angela reached slowly for her bag, handing him the documents without a word. She had been trained for years to remain steady in stressful situations. Nothing in her body language betrayed her irritation or the quiet fire building inside her. Daniels glanced at the papers, then smirked. "You know why I pulled you over?" he asked, though it was clear he had no reason. "No, officer," Angela answered softly. He leaned in closer, lowering his voice, but his words carried a dangerous edge. "Because people like you think you can drive around here without respect. Maybe I should teach you a lesson." Angela stayed still, her breathing even. She had heard worse in her career, but rarely from someone wearing a uniform meant to represent safety and law. She kept her eyes steady, not giving him the reaction he wanted. Daniels took a step back, pacing slightly, as if considering his next move. Then he returned to the window and spoke in a tone that made his intent clearer. "Here's how this goes. You pay me something, and I let you go. No trouble. But if you don't," he tapped the edge of his holster with a slow, threatening motion, "you may not make it home tonight." The words hung heavy in the air. To most people, this moment would have been paralyzing. The threat of violence, the abuse of power, it was the kind of fear that silenced voices and forced people into submission. But Angela wasn't most people. She had faced far greater dangers than one corrupt officer. Her calm expression didn't change, but inside, her mind sharpened. Every detail mattered: the way he leaned in, the exact words he chose, the time on the dashboard clock. Quietly, she pressed a small button on her keychain, activating a hidden recorder that captured audio. Every word he spoke was now evidence, though he had no idea. "I understand," she said gently, her voice controlled. She pretended to fumble with her wallet, as though nervous, while keeping her tone submissive enough to feed his arrogance. Daniel smirked again, convinced his intimidation was working. "That's better. Meet me tomorrow night at the corner of Main and Birch. Bring cash. Don't tell anyone, or you'll regret it." Angela nodded once, as if she agreed. Inside, she was already mapping her next move. Years of leadership had taught her that patience and timing often brought justice faster than anger. She let him believe he had won this round. The officer stepped back, tossed her documents onto the seat carelessly, and gave a mock salute before walking back to his car. He drove off with the confidence of a man who thought he had just secured another easy victory. Angela sat still for a moment, her hands on the wheel, her heart steady. The sky outside had grown darker, the street now quiet again. She knew what had just happened could not be ignored. Not only for her own dignity, but for every person who had suffered silently at the hands of men like Daniels. She started the car, merging back onto the road, her mind already working like a chess player planning several moves ahead. What Daniels didn't know was that the woman he had just threatened was not only a professional, not only strong, but the director of the FBI. And this time, his threats had been aimed at the wrong person. Angela drove home that night with the weight of the encounter still hanging in the air, but her expression never betrayed the storm of thoughts inside her. For many people, the officer's threats would have left fear, helplessness, or even trauma. But Angela had spent her life walking into rooms full of danger, facing criminals who believed they could outsmart or overpower her. She was not shaken, she was calculating. The moment she entered her quiet house, she placed her keys on the table and sat in the living room with her phone. She played back the recording from her hidden device, listening carefully to every word Officer Daniels had spoken. His tone, his threats, his demand for money, each one was clear and unmistakable. She paused the recording, leaning back in her chair. It wasn't just about her anymore. She thought of the countless other drivers who had likely endured his intimidation and had no proof to fight back. Angela's eyes narrowed with determination. Daniels believed he had chosen the right victim, someone who would stay quiet and obey out of fear. What he didn't know was that he had just stepped into a carefully woven trap of his own making. She already had more than enough evidence to begin an investigation. The next morning, she walked into the headquarters of the FBI like she did every day, her presence commanding quiet respect. The agents in the building greeted her with professionalism, but most of them had no idea about what had happened the night before. To them, she was the director, the leader who carried the weight of national security and criminal justice on her shoulders. But today, she was also a woman seeking justice in her own personal case. Angela called a private meeting with two trusted agents from her internal affairs team, men and women who specialized in investigating corruption within law enforcement. She spoke calmly, detailing the encounter without emotion clouding her voice. Then she played the recording for them. The room grew tense as Daniel's voice filled the air, dripping with arrogance and threat. By the time the recording ended, the agents were looking at Angela with a mix of shock and outrage. "He has no idea who you are," one of them asked. Angela shook her head. "He only saw what he wanted to see. That's the problem. He thinks power is about fear. But now he's going to learn what real power is." The agents leaned forward, eager for direction. Angela outlined the next step: they would let Daniels believe his plan was working. He had set up another meeting for payment. She would go, but this time, she wouldn't be alone. A discreet task force would be nearby, documenting everything and waiting for the right moment to intervene. Meanwhile, in the small town, Daniels walked into the police station with a smirk. He felt triumphant, bragging quietly to a colleague about the easy money he would be collecting soon. His words were laced with arrogance, speaking of Angela not as a human being, but as someone beneath him. What made him most confident was the belief that no one would ever hold him accountable. After all, he had been doing this sort of thing for years, and nothing had ever happened. But what he didn't realize was that his time was running out. Every careless word he spoke, every step he took toward this so-called deal, was being tracked. The following evening, Angela prepared for the meeting. She chose her clothes carefully, looking as ordinary as she had the night before. Nothing about her outfit suggested authority. She wanted Daniels to believe he was still in control. Yet beneath the calm exterior, she carried the quiet confidence of someone who knew the ending of the story long before the villain did. The location Daniels had chosen was a dimly lit parking lot near an old gas station, a place he believed was perfect for intimidation. Angela arrived a few minutes early, parking her car where she could see the surroundings clearly. She wasn't truly alone, her agents were nearby, hidden in unmarked vehicles, their radios quietly buzzing with updates. Minutes later, Daniel's patrol car pulled up. He stepped out, his posture relaxed, his grin wide, as if he had already won. He approached her window with the same arrogance as before. "You brought the money?" he asked, lowering his voice into that same dangerous tone. Angela reached for her bag slowly, pretending to hesitate, letting him feel superior. "Yes," she said softly. Daniel smirked, leaning closer. "Smart choice. You play along, and maybe nothing bad happens." She nodded again, her face unreadable. But inside, she knew this would be the last time he would ever use those words to hurt someone. As he reached for the envelope, Angela's hand paused, her eyes meeting his directly for the first time with quiet intensity. Daniels didn't notice the subtle signal she gave, but her team did. In seconds, dark SUVs rolled silently into the lot, headlights cutting through the shadows. Armed agents stepped out, surrounding the area with precision. Daniels froze, his grin fading into confusion, then shock. "What's this? What's going on?" he stammered. Angela opened her door slowly, stepping out with calm authority. Her voice was steady, almost gentle, but carried the weight of truth. "You should have chosen your words more carefully, Officer Daniels." He looked at her, bewildered. "What are you talking about?" She reached into her jacket and pulled out her badge, holding it up so the dim lights reflected its seal. "I am Angela Reynolds, Director of the FBI." The world seemed to stop in that moment. Daniel's face went pale, his confidence shattered. He stumbled backward, shaking his head in disbelief. The agents closed in, their voices firm as they ordered him to drop his weapon and place his hands behind his back. Angela didn't move closer. She didn't need to. The truth itself was enough to bring him down. For the first time, Daniels understood that the very woman he had mocked and threatened held power beyond anything he could have imagined. As he was cuffed and led away, Angela stood silently, her posture calm, her eyes steady. The meeting had gone exactly as planned. Justice had begun its work. ChatGPT said, the night of the arrest stayed fresh in Angela's mind, not because she was shaken, but because she understood how important it was. A corrupt officer who had built his career on fear was finally facing the law, and she had been the one to expose him. But this was only the beginning. Daniel sat in a holding cell that night, pacing back and forth like a trapped animal. He couldn't understand how everything had flipped in an instant. One moment he believed he had total control, and the next he was surrounded, handcuffed, and humiliated. His thoughts ran wild, searching for someone to blame, but the truth was clear, his arrogance had brought him here. Back at FBI headquarters, Angela met with her task force again. The agents had gathered all the evidence: audio recordings, video surveillance, and even witness statements from her team. It was more than enough to build a strong case. But Angela wasn't just after one officer, she wanted to understand the bigger picture. Corruption rarely existed alone. If Daniels had been this bold, who else in his department knew or even supported his actions? She ordered a full background investigation. The team went through years of Daniels' reports, pulling records of arrests and traffic stops. Patterns began to appear. Many of his arrests involved false charges, questionable evidence, and people who had later complained but were ignored. Angela listened carefully as the agents shared their findings, her expression steady, though each detail deepened her resolve. Meanwhile, in the small town, whispers spread. News traveled quickly when a police officer was taken away by federal agents. At first, people didn't believe it. Daniels had always walked with confidence, untouchable in his own eyes. But now, Rumors of his downfall grew louder, and with them came stories, citizens sharing experiences of intimidation, threats, and unfair treatment. For the first time, voices that had been silenced found courage. Angela returned quietly to the town days later, not in her official capacity but as a listener. She visited local shops, spoke with community leaders, and met with families who had lived in fear. She didn't reveal much about herself, only that she was part of an investigation. The people opened up, describing moments when Daniels had used his badge not to protect, but to control. Their words were filled with relief now that someone was finally holding him accountable. Back in custody, Daniels grew restless. He demanded to speak to a lawyer, then tried to intimidate junior officers who passed by his cell. But nothing worked. The authority he had misused for so long was gone. In its place was a system that finally saw him for what he was, a man who had crossed the line too many times. Angela, however, didn't rush to see him. She wanted him to sit with the weight of his actions. When she finally entered the interrogation room, Daniels looked up with disbelief. She was calm, composed, dressed in her formal suit. He tried to smirk, to regain some sense of control, but his eyes betrayed his unease. "You," he muttered. "This is a mistake. You set me up." Angela placed a folder on the table, filled with the evidence her team had collected. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "You set yourself up, Officer Daniels. You thought intimidation was power. But real power is accountability. And now, you'll face it?" He leaned forward, trying to sound tough. "Do you know how many people will stand with me? You think you can take down a whole department?" Angela's eyes didn't waver. "If there are more like you, then yes. One by one, if necessary. Because this isn't just about you. It's about trust. And you broke it?" The silence that followed was heavier than any threat he had made. Daniels shifted in his seat, for the first time realizing that no excuse could save him. The investigation spread wider, uncovering a culture that had allowed Daniels to act without consequence. Other officers were questioned, some suspended, and others quietly confessed to seeing his behavior but feeling powerless to stop it. Angela knew change wouldn't come overnight, but this was a start. Media outlets began covering the story. Headlines read, "Officer arrested in FBI sting operation and director leads crackdown on corruption." When reporters learned that the woman threatened by Daniels was none other than the FBI director herself, the public reacted with shock. Many admired Angela's composure and courage, but what mattered most to her was the message: no one, no matter their badge or rank, was above the law. In private moments, Angela reflected on the situation. She thought of the danger that night in the parking lot and how easily things could have gone wrong. But she also thought of the people who would now sleep easier, knowing someone had listened. Justice wasn't just about punishing the guilty, it was about restoring faith. As days passed, Daniels was moved through the justice system. His trial awaited, and the evidence against him was overwhelming. For a man who had believed in his own invincibility, the walls were closing in fast. Angela, meanwhile, prepared for the next steps. Her work as FBI director had always been demanding, but this case reminded her of something personal: the importance of using her position to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. She knew the fight against corruption was never ending, but she was ready. The story was no longer just about a corrupt officer. It was about resilience, truth, and the reminder that even in the darkest moments, justice has a way of shining through. The courthouse was crowded the morning Officer Daniels was brought in for his first formal hearing. Journalists lined the steps, cameras clicking, eager to capture the image of the once feared cop now in handcuffs. Inside, the atmosphere was heavy. Citizens who had quietly suffered under his threats filled the benches, wanting to see for themselves that justice was finally catching up to him. Angela arrived not as a victim, but as the FBI director overseeing the case. Her calm presence drew quiet respect. She walked with the authority of someone who had seen countless trials, but today held special meaning. It wasn't just about Daniels, it was about sending a clear message that corruption, intimidation, and abuse of power would not be tolerated. Daniels was escorted into the courtroom, his shoulders tense, his eyes darting around as if searching for a way out. The confidence he once wore like armor was gone. Instead, he looked smaller, trapped by the weight of his own actions. When his eyes met Angela's across the room, his expression hardened. He tried to glare, but the fear underneath was obvious. The prosecution laid out the case with precision. They played the recording of Daniel's threats, his voice echoing in the courtroom for all to hear. Every word he had spoken in arrogance now condemned him. The jurors shifted uncomfortably in their seats, the public gallery murmured, and Daniels sat frozen, unable to argue. Angela didn't testify that day, her role was bigger than that. She sat quietly, watching, her mind replaying the night in the parking lot. She had seen men like Daniels before, people who mistook fear for strength. But seeing him unravel publicly was different. This was no longer just about her safety, it was about the community finally seeing that truth had a louder voice than threats. After the hearing, Daniels was led back into custody to await trial. Outside, reporters rushed to Angela. Microphones surrounded her, voices shouting questions. She paused on the courthouse steps, lifted her chin, and spoke clearly. This case is not about one officer. It is about restoring trust. Law enforcement exists to protect, not to harm. When that trust is broken, accountability is not optional, it is necessary. No one is above the law. Her words made headlines that evening. Across the country, people discussed the story of a corrupt officer who had unknowingly threatened the director of the FBI. For some, it was shocking irony. For others, it was an inspiring reminder that power could be challenged and broken when used wrongly. Back in the small town, citizens began speaking out more openly. Some shared their stories with investigators, while others expressed relief that someone had finally listened. Community leaders held meetings, promising to push for reforms and stronger oversight. Daniel's arrest had shaken the department, but it also planted seeds of change. Privately, Angela continued to meet with her task force. The investigation had grown larger than she had expected. Daniels had not acted entirely alone, there were others in the department who had looked away or quietly supported him. Some had shared his prejudices, while others had stayed silent out of fear. Both silence and prejudice had fueled his behavior. Angela knew addressing this was just as important as punishing Daniels himself. One late evening, Angela visited the holding facility. She entered the interrogation room, where Daniels sat waiting. He looked tired, his arrogance worn down by days of confinement. She placed a thin file on the table and sat across from him. "You're facing years in prison," she said evenly. "But you should know, the damage you caused goes beyond charges. You left scars on people who trusted the badge you wore." Daniel sneered weakly. "You think locking me up changes anything? There'll always be more like me." Angela's gaze stayed firm. "That's exactly why this matters. People will remember that you were held accountable. And others who think they can do the same will think twice." For the first time, Daniels had no comeback. The silence in the room spoke louder than his words ever could. As she left the facility that night, Angela reflected on the long road ahead. Justice was not a single victory, it was a journey. But this case had shown something powerful: the truth could catch even those who believed they were untouchable. The days that followed saw more headlines, more discussions, and more people inspired by Angela's quiet strength. She never sought praise. For her, it was about responsibility. She had been threatened, blackmailed, and underestimated, but she had turned that moment into a turning point for many. And as Daniel sat in his cell, stripped of the power he had misused, Angela stood taller than ever, not because she was the director, but because she had reminded everyone what real leadership looked like. Thought for 9 seconds. The trial began on a bright Monday morning, and the town felt different than before. The air outside the courthouse carried a quiet hope, as if people could finally breathe again. Families stood together on the steps, some holding hands, some standing alone with their memories. They had come to see the end of a long, troubling chapter. Inside, the courtroom was full, but it was not noisy. It was calm, serious, and focused. Everyone knew this day mattered. Angela sat near the front, not as a victim seeking attention but as a leader watching the system do its work. She had chosen a simple suit, nothing flashy, and she kept her posture relaxed. Her calm face showed respect for the court, for the process, and for the people who had waited a long time to feel safe. She did not smile, but there was steadiness in her eyes. The trial moved with careful steps. The prosecution played the recording again, the one where the threats and demands were clear. The jury listened, their faces thoughtful. Witnesses from the FBI task force described the sting operation in plain words. They explained how they followed standards, how they documented each step, and how there was no confusion about what had happened. Nothing was rushed. Nothing was exaggerated. Everything rested on facts. Then, people from the community spoke. They told short stories, moments when they felt small, moments when fear had shaped their choices. Their voices did not shake as much as before. Sharing the truth in a court of law gave them strength. Some looked toward Angela as they finished, as if to say thank you without words. She gave them a tiny nod, a gesture that meant she heard them and that their voices mattered. The defense tried to raise doubt. They spoke about long hours and the stress of the job. They said the officer had made poor choices in a hard profession. But each time, the facts returned like steady waves. The recording did not change. The pattern in past reports did not change. The people who had spoken did not change. The truth stood still and clear, like a lighthouse in rough weather. When the time came, the jury left the room to talk. The courthouse fell into a quiet pause. A clock ticked. A child in the back row asked his mother a soft question, and she answered with a whisper. Outside, a light wind touched the flag. Angela looked down at her hands for a moment, thinking not about victory, but about responsibility. Justice was not a trophy. It was a promise kept. The jury returned sooner than many expected. Their verdict was firm. Guilty on the charges of extortion, threats, and abuse of authority. The words did not land with cheers or anger. They landed with relief. Some people closed their eyes and let out long breaths. Others pressed their lips together and sat a little taller. Angela did not move, she simply listened, then looked toward the rows of citizens. This moment belonged to them. Sentencing came days later. The judge spoke about duty and trust. He said a badge is not a shield for wrongdoing. He said the law protects all people, and those who carry the law must also carry humility. The sentence was measured and clear. It signaled to the whole town, and far beyond it, that harm done under color of duty would meet honest consequences. But the story did not stop at a sentence. It moved into what mattered next. The police department announced changes. Body cameras would be audited by an independent office every month. A public complaints process would be opened, with updates shared in a transparent way. Training would expand beyond rules to include empathy, communication, and practical steps for de-escalation. An early warning system would flag patterns: too many stops of the same kind, too many complaints without action, and those flags would lead to coaching or discipline before problems grew. A small community board, made up of local residents, clergy, teachers, and business owners, would meet with the department each quarter. Their job would not be to attack or defend. Their job would be to learn, advise, and hold the department to its promises. At the first town hall after the trial, the room was full but calm. The new acting chief stood at the microphone. He did not make excuses. He said, "We are here to listen first." One by one, people stood and spoke. A shop owner asked about safe ways to report concerns. A high school senior asked how young people could learn about the law without fear. A grandfather spoke slowly, telling how his granddaughter had started walking a longer route home because she did not feel safe on the main road. The acting chief wrote notes. He did not interrupt. When he answered, he kept his words simple and direct. He promised to return with updates, not just promises. Angela sat in the back row for that meeting, unannounced. She watched the room lean toward a new path, the kind of path that grows when people choose to build, not break. Her phone buzzed once in her pocket. A message from her team confirmed the oversight changes had been approved. She put the phone away and kept listening to the community. This was their space. Days later, a letter arrived at headquarters. It came from a person who had once felt powerless. The letter was short: "Thank you for not turning away. My kids ask questions about fairness now. I can tell them the truth that the system can listen." Angela read the letter twice. She thought about all the letters that would never be written, from people who did not like to put feelings on a page. She held the letter gently, like something fragile and precious. In the months that followed, the small town began to change in ways that were easy to miss if you only looked at headlines. Officers started joining weekend events, book fairs, park cleanups, career days at the school. Not as a show, but as a habit. A young officer started a walk and talk hour every Thursday evening, where anyone could join him for a loop around the block and speak about concerns or ideas. A group of 7th graders visited the station to see the technology that kept both officers and residents safe, and they asked smart questions. The acting chief made sure the answers were simple and honest. At the police academy, Angela gave a short talk to a class of new recruits. She did not speak about the case in detail. Instead, she spoke about a promise: "The law is not only what you enforce," she said. "It is how you stand. It is how you speak to strangers. It is how you handle being right, and how you handle being wrong." She paused, letting the room breathe. A badge should feel heavy. Let it remind you to lift others. One recruit raised a hand and asked how to recover trust once it is broken. Angela nodded. "You cannot demand trust," she said. "You earn it in quiet ways, by showing up, by telling the truth, by fixing what you break. It comes back slowly. But it does come back." Back in the town, a small ceremony took place in the park. It was not grand. There was no stage, just a few chairs under a tree. A community leader read names of people who had filed complaints in the past without details, without old pain. Then she rang a small bell and said, "We see you." People clapped softly. It felt like a release, a way to mark what had been hard and point to what could be better. Angela attended that gathering as well, standing near the edge, half in shade, half in light. A boy of about 10 walked up to her, holding a paper airplane. He looked at her with serious eyes and asked, "Are you the one who helped?" Angela smiled a little and said, "Many people helped." The boy nodded and handed her the plane. On its wing, in shaky pencil letters, were the words, "Be kind. Be brave." She thanked him and kept the plane, later placing it on her desk where serious files lived. The former officer, now far from the life he once knew, sent a statement through his lawyer months later. It was brief. He admitted wrongdoing. He said he was learning, and that he hoped the town would heal. Some people felt nothing when they read it. Others felt a small measure of peace. Healing is personal, it does not move at the same speed for everyone. Angela understood that. She did not try to push feelings into neat boxes. She let time do its work. As the year turned, reports showed something simple and strong: complaints went down, not because people were silent, but because behavior improved. Response times got better. New hiring standards brought in candidates who spoke 2 or 3 languages, who had volunteered in schools, who had cared for aging parents, who knew what it meant to listen. The quarterly meetings continued. Sometimes they were long. Sometimes they were gentle. Always, they were open. One evening, Angela sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea and the small paper airplane. The house was quiet. Out the window, the last light of day softened the edges of the street. She thought about the night of the stop, the sound of the siren, the chill of the air. She thought about the recording, the sting operation, the courtroom, the town hall, the letters, the recruits. She thought about the people who chose courage when it felt easier to stay silent. Her phone chimed one more time. A message from the acting chief, a photo of a new bulletin board in the station lobby. On it were notes from residents, written on colorful cards: "Thank you for listening. Please patrol near the school at 3 p.m. We are hosting a food drive, join us. My grandmother says hello." At the center of the board, printed in plain black letters, was a short promise: "Protect with respect." Angela's smile was small, but real. This was not a perfect ending. Life rarely offered those. It was better than that. It was a true one, a careful, steady change that started with a dark moment and grew into a light that others could follow. She placed the paper airplane back on the table and whispered, "Be kind. Be brave." Then she stood, turned off the kitchen light, and let the night settle into something peaceful and new.